Hey, I'm Nicole. I am a designer, maker, and content creator. My big passion is doing creative projects for myself in my own wardrobe. I love finding things secondhand, reworking them, and even taking things that exist in my current wardrobe, but turning them into something new for every occasion. In between those fun creative projects, I do take on other work, largely for income. I've been doing clothing alterations and more recently, invisible knitwear repair as a little bread and butter side hustle. These are jobs that I take on depending on my availability and flexibility, and it's just a great way for me to earn some extra income using skills that I already have. For people that sew or knit or make who want to earn a bit of extra income from those skills, for me the biggest opportunity at the moment is in repairs and alterations. I thought I would take you this week along with me on the jobs that I'm doing. I'm going to talk you through what the jobs are, I'm going to do them with you, and I'll tell you what I charge. So let's get into it. This week I'm going to be working on a couple of alteration jobs. I have a client that brought in these two garments. This one is a velvet vintage dress that she wants taken out. She is quite big busted and she's got a tiny waist, and so the dress is just a little bit snug. I mean, we really struggled to get the zip up. We can do it, but it is a bit of a struggle. So she just wants me to let out some of the seams to create a bit of extra ease in the dress. So we've got to do that on the outside of the dress and also on the lining. She's also brought in this leather skirt, again another vintage piece, which fits her fine on the hip but is a little bit baggy on the waist. Bearing in mind it already has a sort of elasticated design at the back, I suggested that as the first fix we just replace the elastic inside with a smaller, newer, tighter elastic. With leather, because the needle punctures the leather and it doesn't go away, we have to be careful about restitching and reworking leather too much because it can end up puncturing the leather to the extent that it ends up ripping and tearing. So I told her I was very reluctant to start unpicking and restitching a lot of the waistband because I was just afraid that it would end up compromising the quality of the leather. So that is what we're going to do on this one. Then we have 3 knitwear repair jobs. I'm expecting another one as well to come in later on today. Generally speaking, with these knitwear jobs, they are invisible repairs on holes. So this one is probably a cashmere jumper. We have got a hole here and probably maybe 1 or 2 elsewhere. And then I have another couple of knitwear repairs to do, but these are for a charity. I have had a long-standing relationship with Farah, the charity. I absolutely love them. I think the team are just so lovely to work with. And I went to their Streatham store recently because I did a collaboration with them for Sustainable Fashion Week where they allowed me to go through some of their charity rag bags and rescue some pieces for transformation to put onto our Sustainable Fashion Week runway. And when I was in the store putting the pieces onto the mannequin in the window for display, Ellum, the store manager, asked me if I would help out with a couple of knitwear repairs. So here we've got a jumper that has a hole here in the shoulder, so we're going to do an invisible repair on that. And this is a designer piece of knitwear that got donated to them, which apparently is worth several £100s. So they were quite keen to get this fixed up and put on the shop floor. Fortunately, it's not a hole. That would have been a bit more tricky to do, but we have got quite a few of these snagged and loose yarns that we need to put back into place. So let's get into the first job. Let's start with the alteration jobs. We are going to tackle this dress first. Let's get her to the cutting table and let's get into it. Let's have a look at this dress now. We have got a lining, but it is not attached to the bottom of the dress, which is very handy for us. We don't have to do any detaching of lining and getting into the inside. There's no bagging out or anything like that. We've got a little bit of the lining here that's come away from the main dress, so we will also be fixing that at some point. And I've also just noticed that the stitching on the lining has come away from the zip. That looks like a little hand stitch. We'll just do that at the end. Let's go in. We've got quite a few seams here that we can use to let the dress out and add a little bit more ease around the bust area and the waist area. And we've got a fairly generous seam allowance as well on some of the seams. It looks like we've got up to 1.5 centimeters on some of them, or just 1 centimeter or so on some of the others. So we only really need to let out a few, and we could just let it out 0.5 centimeter on each, and that will get us to the amount that we need to take it out by. The key with alterations is to get to the final result, but with maximum efficiency. What I've done here is I've just placed some pins to mark the waistline and also the bust line. I'm going to be letting out these 4 seams seams on the front. I'm going to be letting out 1.5 centimeters on each of these 4 seams at the bust and 1 centimeter from each of these seams along the waist. So we're going to take this to the machine. We are going to just do ourselves a new line of stitching along those seams, which just creates a bit of extra ease in the places that we need it. The way I got into alteration work was kind of by proxy. I had been sewing for a number of years, and there was a point in time a few years ago where I wasn't really earning any money. I wasn't earning any income. I had transitioned out of my previous career, which was in jewelry design, and I was sewing a lot, but I wasn't really monetizing it. I didn't really know how to monetize it. I was thinking at the time that maybe I would start up doing ready-to-wear and things like that, but because I'd already been through the whole fashion grinder with my jewelry business, I just didn't feel like that was an area I wanted to get back into, and certainly not in fashion. It was bad enough with jewelry when you didn't even have lots of sizing and stock issues, but fashion was a whole different ball game, and I wasn't really that keen on going back into the fashion industry, and certainly not for ready-to-wear. My husband at the time said, "Oh, why don't you think about doing alterations?" And I kind of laughed it off at the time because I was like, oh, you know, it's donkey work, doesn't pay. I just thought I would find it really boring and not very well paid. A couple of years later, I ended up signing up for a pattern cutting course at a further education college in London, which is called Morley College. And my tutor on that course, who was absolutely brilliant, she had an alterations business on the side, which she'd been doing for a number of years. And when I finished on the course, I asked her if I could come and work with her and get some experience, because the thing about alterations is it's actually quite a different skill compared to just sewing from flat fabric from scratch, because it's not just about knowledge of sewing. You also have to understand how garments fit, how to adjust fit issues, and also how to work with a garment that's already pretty much completely constructed. There's a lot of deconstruction involved also quite often, which can be very laborious, and it is a bit of a pain, to be honest. But I think there were several advantages that I found when I started training to do alterations. The first thing is, I think it actually made my sewing better in general, because I began to understand garment construction in a much more intuitive and native way than when you're just following patterns and sewing from flat fabric from scratch. You have to understand how the garment works currently, you have to deconstruct, and then you have to do the alteration and then reverse engineer to get back to the original result, or what looks like the original result. Obviously depending on the alteration, but it's a very different set of skills, and funnily enough, I didn't really have the confidence to do it before I started working with Jackie, who was my tutor on the pattern cutting course. I learned so much from her, and it's really working with her doing alterations 1 day a week in her alteration shop that gave me the knowledge and experience and the confidence to be able to do it privately myself. And this is what I recommend to anybody looking to monetize their sewing skill. Nobody needs more tote bags, nobody needs more scrunchies. I think the best way to monetize your sewing skills in 2025 is to start getting good at alterations. Alterations and repairs. Those are services that are increasingly in demand, and I just think it's such a handy skill to learn, not even just for doing it for other people, but for doing it for yourself in your own wardrobe. But truth be told, this is the kind of work that I mainly really only do for money. If I didn't need the money, I don't think I would be doing as much of this work as I currently do, because my passion does lie elsewhere. But I think as far as using your skills to pay bills, I can't complain really. I finished letting out the seams, and now I'm just unpicking the original lines of stitching that were on the dress. And I have to say, one of the real perks of doing alterations professionally is you get really immune to unpicking. You get to a stage where it's just part of the course. You're not that emotionally drained or invested in it. You just get on with it and do it. So my muscle and my stamina for doing epic amounts of unpicking is actually quite high. So I think that's actually a pretty handy thing to have come out of all of this alteration work that I've been doing over the past few years. I have finished doing the letting out on the seams, so now I am just doing a bit of mending on the garment. I'm just restitching the lining onto the zip where the stitching had come off, and I just need to sew a hook and eye onto the top of the zip, and then this alteration will be done. Now let's tackle the next alteration job we have for this client, which is to take in the waistband on this vintage leather skirt. Normally with a waistband alteration, you would take the waistband off, you would bring in the material from the garment. On a skirt like this, I might taper in the side seam or potentially add a dart into the back to taper it into the waist. And then you would take out the excess amount from the waistband and then reattach the waistband onto the garment. However, bearing in mind it's a leather garment, a particularly vintage leather garment, we are going to do another solution. There is already some elastic in there. You can see it's already a little bit elasticated. I suspect the elastic's just gone a little bit saggy. It's probably very old. So we're going to go in, we're going to replace the elastic with new elastic that's a little bit tauter, and then we will also move this button because I think it was actually moved by somebody at one point. You can actually see where the old puncture holes were, presumably because they wanted to let out a bit of ease in the waist, but this particular client needs it to be brought in. So we are going to reposition the button back onto where it should be so that it fits into that buttonhole nice and neatly. Let's get into the main waistband alteration. Looking at the waistband, there's no side seam in the waistband. We've just got a seam here in center front. So I think the best thing to do would be to get into the waistband through this end section here near the zip. We will undo the stitching here. We will be able to get inside and have a look at what's going on. When it comes to taking on alteration work, every single job has to be approached almost on a case-by-case basis because every garment is constructed differently. Even if you look at what you might think to be a standard trouser, sometimes the pocket constructions are different. The way they have added in certain details is very different. So you almost have to look at the actual garment that's in front of you, how it was constructed. There is a bit of problem solving that needs to be done to work out how you're going to get to the final result that the client is looking to achieve. So it's finding a balance between what is the most efficient way to achieve the result that the client wants, but also in the most cost-effective way, which comes down to time. The more time something takes me, obviously the more I've got to charge. When it comes to alterations, almost anything is possible. It really just comes down to how badly you want it and how much you're willing to invest in getting that thing done. But as far as feasibility, yeah, some jobs are more complicated, some jobs are much more labor intensive and time consuming than others, but most things are possible. Okay, so we are in this side of the waistband. Let's go ahead and take our 1.5 inches out of this elastic on this side. Here we are at the machine. I've got my walking foot installed. I've seen things where they say to use a Teflon foot and so on for leather. I do have one, but I'll be honest, I've never really had a huge amount of success with Teflon feet in general. I'm using a very, very big stitch length, like 4.5, and I have now secured the elastic inside the channel. Now I'm going to move on to a couple of knitwear repair jobs. Here we have one cashmere jumper and we have one cashmere cardigan. What I'm doing here is just looking through the garment. I can see there's a hole right there. I take a round bottomed safety pin and I just place it just where the hole is. That also makes it easy for me to come back and see where the holes are when I've come to do the actual repair. This particular one is quite a fine gauge knit. They're not too bad to do, but if you get a hole in the ribbing in one of those jumpers, it's always a bit just about all right doing it in a stockinette stitch, but repairing holes in ribbing in a very small gauge is not often fun. So there we've got a little cluster of 3 holes there. What I do next here is take photos of the areas that I'm going to be repairing and I send it to the customer just to confirm the areas I'm going to be working on and also so that I can show them a before and after comparison at the end. This is my knitwear repair kit, and the thing that everybody always wants to know is where'd you get the matching yarn to do the repair? Well, short answer is you harvest it from the garment. I like to do it from one of the sleeve seams, but you do have to be very careful to cut the sleeve yarn and not cut the jumper. Now I'm going to stitch the seam closed. I tend to do it on the machine just for speed and efficiency. When it's a knit like this, it's okay to do on the machine. If it was a much chunkier knit, I would do it by hand. I'm now in the habit of closing up the seam as soon as I have harvested the yarn because it happened to me once before where I left it to the end and then I totally forgot to come back to it and I sent it out to the customer with a big hole in the sleeve. So I learned my lesson a long time ago with that. And now we've got our matching yarn. There have been occasions, like on this jumper for example, where they have not stitched the seams with the matching yarn, which is a little bit naughty. So sometimes you have to get a little bit creative and clever about where you can harvest. And then then in the event that I can't harvest it from the garment, I'll usually have to try and find a yarn that is as closely matching in colour and weight and composition as I can. That's been in the minority of cases, actually, I have to say. But you'd be surprised, there are some designer knitwear brands that I have worked on that have been a little bit naughty, and they don't seam their cashmere with cashmere, making it much trickier to invisibly repair. But I shall not name and shame. Now, let's get ready to do the repair. I am going to film this one to turn it into a YouTube short or maybe an Instagram reel. We're getting all professional with our camera setup here. So let's see about this hole. First thing I like to do is just set up what's called a scaffold. I just like to go over the entire hole with one scaffolding set of stitches, and then I use that to anchor the other smaller stitches that are going to replicate the jumper. Bit of a tricky balance trying to see what I'm doing here through the magnifying glass while trying to make sure that my hands are in frame on the phone. I don't really mind doing these types of repairs as much because you can just sort of zone out and get a little bit meditative with it. Whereas I feel like with alterations, you need to be a little bit more cognizant of what you're doing. I mean, you do with this, but it's just a little bit more meditative, I guess. I've been asked before about how I price my work when it comes to alterations and repairs. With alterations, generally speaking, it tends to be a quote based on how much time I think it's going to take me. So if I think a job's going to take me an hour, then I might charge, I don't know, 15, 20 pounds. It just really depends. If it's something very, very run of the mill, if I'm doing a trouser shortening or something which I don't really have to think too much about, then I might only charge like 15 pounds an hour, maybe 18 pounds an hour. But if it's something that will require a lot more brain space and thinking and problem solving, then maybe I might charge something more like 20 pounds an hour. It just really depends. That's one reason why I think with alteration work, ultimately it's the kind of work where you are trading your time for money. So there's only ever so much income you can make because there's only so much time in the day that you have. So in a way, that's why I prefer doing knitwear repairs more recently, because when I'm pricing my knitwear repair jobs, it really is a combination of time, but also complexity. If it's a job that is going to require color work or a particularly complex stitch pattern or something like that, obviously there's a time factor involved in that, but also I just think there's also a skill factor in that. You are paying for someone's expertise and skill. So I do charge a bit more of a premium for my knitwear repair work than I do for alterations, because alterations are a lot more of a common service. I mean, most people can go to their local dry cleaner and get basic alterations done. They don't have to come to someone like me. But when it comes to knitwear, there are really not that many places you can go and get your knitwear repaired properly, as in invisibly. Often I am just putting a stab in the air. I think with this kind of work, it very much is you win some, you lose some. There's some jobs where the price I quoted, when I think about the actual work I ended up doing, I was really at a net loss. But then there are other jobs where maybe it ended up being quicker than I thought, or ended up being not as complicated as I thought. And then it ends up being kind of a net win, really. Oh dear, that's annoying. While I've been chatting away, I haven't been looking at what's happening on this camera, and my hands were out of frame for most of it. These are the joys of filming content. Most of the jobs I get are through a platform called The Seam. The platform connects makers with people who want repairs and alterations. I started off being a maker available for alterations, but then I trained in doing knitwear repair actually through The Seam. The Seam was seeing such a surge in demand for knitwear repairs, and then they ended up training some of their other makers to do knitwear repair as well. So I actually went on a couple of their workshops and I really enjoyed it. It's the kind of thing where I think anyone can learn how to do it, but being able to get to a stage where you are doing it really well does take time. It does take time. It is a skill that you need to practice a lot. And when I got my first actual job through The Seam, doing a knitwear repair for someone, it was quite nerve-wracking, but you very, very quickly learn. You very quickly learn. The more jobs you do, the better you get. And I'm now at the stage where I'm pretty skilled at it now. It's one of those skills that I'm so pleased that I have, because I just think in this day and age, the more you can add to your armory of skills, the better off you'll be, especially as someone working in creative industries. And what's nice is the whole industry around mending and repairing has grown so much. I think people's consciousness around looking after their garments has improved. So I've never been short of work. I don't even have to advertise. The work just comes to me through the seam. Obviously, they do all of the marketing and outreach. So as a maker, it's absolutely brilliant for me. It's just been a godsend in terms of a side hustle and just getting extra income when I need it. Now we're going to start our second knitwear repair job of the day, which is to repair the hole in this jumper here. This one is one that I'm doing for the charity Farah. This was a top that was donated to their charity shop in Streatham, but it's got a hole in it and I just offered to mend it for them because I just thought they'd have a better chance of selling it, but also selling it for a bit more money if the hole was repaired. Someone was asking me about where would be best to start if you wanted to get into doing alterations and repairs, and I would say start with your own jobs. Start with your own alterations and your own repairs, because that is probably the best place to get some experience and some practice, because it does take time to acquire these kinds of skills to a standard where you feel confident enough to offer it as a service. There's all sorts of different ways you could get into it, but start with actual jobs, start with things you actually need to do and just build up the experience from there. It is finally Friday. I am working on my last repair job of the week, which is fixing all of the snags on this jumper, which I have been working on for hours. I'm not even exaggerating. I was working on this pretty much most of yesterday afternoon and into the evening. And it's one of those jobs that I am not even getting paid for. I'm doing this voluntarily for the charity. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, just get through it, just get through it. But anyway, I've just got a little bit left to go. I think the challenge here is fixing snags. You've got to follow the path of the yarn as it winds and weaves around, and you're not quite sure which direction to pull a lot of the slack into. So you're kind of hedging your bets, but yeah, it's just a bit of a brain teaser following exactly where the yarn is going. There's lots of different yarns going on here. We've got some more fuzzy ones, and so it just keeps catching as well. So anyway, I'm just going to get it to a state where it's good enough for the charity to sell it, and then we are going to move on because it's kind of doing my head in now. So here's the roundup of all of the alteration and repairs jobs I did this week and how much I charged. This alteration job, we have let out the bust and the waist through these seams. We also let out the corresponding seams in the lining. We have repaired a few little areas of the lining where they came away from the dress, and we added a hook and eye to the top of the zip. I would say this was between 2 and 3 hours work, and the amount I quoted was £50. Our second alteration job of the week. This alteration took me 45 minutes and I had quoted the client £15, which makes that an hourly rate of £20, which is probably the minimum, quite honestly, I would go for with alterations. On this knitwear repair, I did an invisible mend on a hole over here and a reinforcement on this side. This repair took me about an hour and a quarter in all, and I quoted the customer £42. So that gives me an hourly rate of about £33.50 on this job. On this job, I did an invisible repair on a cluster of 3 little holes here in the sleeve. I challenge you to find the repaired area. This repair job ended up taking me just under 2 hours, and I quoted the customer £60. So that gives me an hourly rate of about £30 an hour for this repair. Next, I did an invisible repair near the shoulder of this jumper. This took me about 40 minutes, and this is a job I did for free for the charity Farah, so I'm not earning any money from it. And finally, I fixed multiple snags in this designer knitwear. This job took me in all about 4.5 hours, and again, doing it for free for the charity Farah. So unfortunately, not getting paid for that one. Now you could probably see why I prefer doing knitwear repairs to alterations. Like for like, time-wise, I feel like I just earn more from knitwear repairs because it's a much more specialized skill and there's not many places you can go to get your knitwear invisibly repaired. Whereas with alterations, you've got plenty of options. You've got dry cleaners if it's very basic alterations. I think sewing is a lot more of a common skill, and so I never really feel like I can charge as much for alterations as I do for knitwear. I hope you found this video insightful to get a little glimpse into the work I do on the side to earn money and how much I charge. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.